O spinner, weaver of our lives. Your loom is love. May we who are gathered here be empowered by that love to weave new patterns, patterns of truth, patterns of justice, patterns of a precious life woven into a web that is strong, beautiful, and everlasting.
Please join me in the responsive reading in your bulletin. There's much we cannot understand. Much we cannot order or control. Let us set forth our lives then, not mostly towards outcomes, but towards ways of being that are worthy of us. Let us assure all who gather here this day that no one need walk to freedom. May we, in this hour and wherever we go, be good company to those we meet along the sacred way. Good morning. My name is Diane Boerman, and I have been coming to Fountain Street Church for about 10 years. I don't remember the first time that I came. I don't know the circumstances. I just know I came back, and I kept coming back. My daughter Leah was a few months old at the time. She's now 10 years old. We started coming because even though I had rejected religion, basically, I felt I needed to be doing something on Sunday mornings, and this seemed like the place to go. Or else my parents would take her to church with them, and I don't know. I was a single parent at the time. It was a really rough time. I was scared. I was not trusting. I came on Sunday mornings. I pretended to socialize. I joined some groups. I was on the softball team for a few years. Sorry about that. We were just getting started. They're really good now, though. I would do things, but I was always sort of on the peripheral. Over time, I learned that I was loved, and I was accepted. I was welcomed. I wasn't weird or strange. I wasn't evil, and I didn't have to be afraid of hell. But I still kept to myself. I never let my guard down, and I never opened up. But it's been about 10 years now. My daughter is in 4th grade. My husband and I recently got married in January. I spend my time teaching in character school, which is amazing. If you want a truly awesome experience, go and spend your Sunday morning in character school with those kids and learn from them. It's awesome. Or spend time in the nursery holding a baby. It's fantastic. I've put up a little mini "In This House We Believe" sign at work. I don't have one out in my yard yet, but that's going to be one of my next steps. But it's up there at work so that at least my coworkers know what I believe, where I stand. These are kind of big steps for me. They sound like little things. I prefer to be invisible. But there's too much at stake now, and I realized that in the last few months. Maybe I was just oblivious before. I don't know. All that is to say, it's scary. It's scary to put yourself out there. It's scary to stand up and say, this is what I believe, this is where I stand. But I'm going to do it because it's important. Whatever it is that brought you here today, please know that you are not alone. Wherever you are in life, chances are someone here can relate to your circumstances or can understand or can listen, and they can help you be stronger, and they can help you be braver, and they can help give you the courage to do what you need to do. As we say in the character school, we are the people of Fountain Street Church, people with open minds, loving hearts, and welcoming hands. Welcome to Fountain Street.
you. My name is Ellen Keener, and I'm from the Withered Tree Sangha. I want to thank you for letting us participate in your service today. The name of our meditation community derives from a saying attributed to the Buddha, "On the withered tree a flower blooms." Members of the Withered Tree Sangha have been practicing mindfulness regularly in various settings for over 16 years. For the past 18 months, we've been practicing twice a week in room 104 of the Fountain Street Church. Our Sunday afternoon session is primarily a silent meditation, prefaced by an optional non-sectarian Dharma discussion, whereas the Wednesday evening meetings are aligned with the tradition of Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. Everyone is welcome, and of course, additional information can be found on our website. We would like to again thank Fountain Street for making room for us here, both for our weekly practices and for this invitation to celebrate Wesak with you. Wesak is a traditional Buddhist holiday celebrating the birth of the Buddha. Buddhist scriptures indicate that on the full moon in May 10 this year, a Buddha named Sakyamuni was born. The historical Buddha was a human being, just like we are. But understanding and love were developed to a very high degree in him, and he became fully awakened. Wesak can be celebrated with multi-day festivals or celebrations that can be quite simple, like ours today. Two aspects are common to Wesak celebrations: paying homage to the Buddha and making concerted efforts to bring happiness to others, which was one of the Buddha's core teachings. Washing the baby Buddha is a traditional part of Wesak celebrations around the globe, and we invite anyone who would like to participate in this ritual with us to come forward at the end of this morning's service. We intend to bring happiness to you with decorations and small treats we've brought. If you feel moved to celebrate further, please consider making a special Wesak donation to your favorite charity or social cause. In addition to the baby washing ritual, the Buddha is traditionally honored by reciting sutras or precepts. In that spirit, we would like also to share the 5 precepts, which are abbreviated from the translation of Thich Nhat Hanh, who encourages the precepts to be considered as mindfulness trainings rather than rigid rules. While we may not live up to them fully, they offer a mirror in which to observe our thoughts and our actions.
Precept 1, reverence for life. Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion, and to learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world, in my thinking or in my way of life. Seeing that harmful actions arise from anger, fear, greed, and intolerance, which in turn come from dualistic and discriminative thinking, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views in order to transform violence, fanaticism, and dogmatism in myself and in the world.
True happiness. Aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I am committed to practicing generosity in my thinking, speaking, and acting. I am determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others. And I will share my time, energy, and material resources with those who are in need. I will practice looking deeply to see that the happiness and suffering of others are not separated from my own happiness and suffering. I am committed to practice right livelihood so that I can help reduce the suffering of living beings on Earth and reverse the process of global warming.
Precept 3, true love. Aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I am committed to cultivating responsibility and learning ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. Knowing that sexual desire is not love, and that sexual activity motivated by craving always harms myself and others, I am determined not to engage in sexual relations without true love and a deep, long-term commitment made known to my family and friends. Seeing that body and mind are one, I am committed to learning appropriate ways to take care of my sexual energy and cultivate loving kindness, compassion, and joy for my greater happiness and the greater happiness of others.
Precept number 4, loving speech and deep listening. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening in order to relieve suffering and promote peace in myself and among other people, ethnic and religious groups, and nations. Knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, I am committed to speaking truthfully, using words that inspire confidence, joy, and hope. I will practice right diligence to nourish my capacity for understanding, love, joy, and inclusiveness, and gradually transform anger, violence, and fear that lie deep within my consciousness.
Precept 5, nourishment and healing. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I am committed to cultivating good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, and my society by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. I will practice looking deeply into how I consume the 4 kinds of nutriments, namely edible foods, sense impressions, volition, and consciousness. I am determined not to cover up loneliness, anxiety, or other suffering by losing myself in consumption. I will contemplate interbeing and consume in a way that preserves peace, joy, and well-being in my body and consciousness, and in the collective body and consciousness of my family, society, and earth.
We take time in our gathering to center ourselves, to pay attention to the breath that gives us life. And in the spirit of our worship and practice with the withered tree this morning, I invite you to join your stillness with a question, thus making a contemplation today. And it's a question that I believe that the precepts invite us to answer. It is a question which I think our very lives set us toward. It is a question we don't hear terribly often, and one which I think is a challenge and worthy of our time this day. And the question is simply this: what do I stand for? What do I rise for? It is a question that I'm certain our guest this morning, Joslin Monahan, is going to answer in her unique way. And I commend you in the silence that now follows to take this question into your practice, to breathe deeper and slower in such a way that you might find the beginnings of an answer to this most profound question of our lives. What, my friends, do you stand for? Let's gather our hearts and minds. As you conclude your practice, I welcome you to bring to heart and mind the name of one who has inspired your knowledge, your being, your practice in answering this very question. May it be so, and amen.
Was a little too complicated. See, 0 didn't satisfy me, 1,000,000 didn't make me happy. But that's when I learned a lesson, that it's all about your perception. Hey, are you a papa or a superstar? So you act, so you feel, so you are. It ain't about the size of your car, it's about the size of the faith in your heart. There's home, doesn't cost a thing to smile. Of Brazil, I met a young brother that made me feel like I could accomplish anything. You see, just like me, he wanted to sing. He had no windows and no doors. He lived a simple life and was extremely poor. On top of all that, he had no eyesight, but that didn't keep him from seeing the light. He said, "What's it like in the USA?" And all I did was complain. He said, "Living here is paradise." He taught me paradise in your mind. You know, there's hope. Doesn't cost a thing to smile. You don't have to pay to laugh. You better thank God for that. There's hope. Doesn't cost a thing to smile. You don't have to pay to laugh. You better thank God for that. Every time I turn on the TV, somebody's acting crazy. If you let it, it'll drive you crazy. So I'm taking back my power today. Gas prices, they keep on rising. The governments, they keep on lying. We gotta keep on surviving, keep living our truth and do the best we can do, 'cause there's hope. Doesn't cost a thing to smile. You don't have to pay to laugh. You better thank God for that. Ooh, there's hope. Doesn't cost a thing to smile. You don't have to pay to laugh. You better thank God for that. There's hope. Stand up for your rights. Keep shining your light and show the world your smile. Stand up for your rights. Keep shining your light and show the world your smile. Stand up for your rights. Keep shining your light and show the world your smile.
Good morning. First, before I even introduce myself, I just want to say thank you. That was amazing. So amazing. And music is just, I'm a little speechless. That's a bad way to start talking, but it's your fault, not mine. I'm Joslin Monahan. I am the current chair of the Western Unit of the ACLU of Michigan. We're a volunteer organization. I'm also a devoted fighter for civil liberties. A few weeks ago, Pastor Wooden sent me an email, and he asked if I would like to speak about the ACLU on May 7th. And whenever anyone asks me that, maybe not the May 7th part, but whenever anyone asks me that, I say yes. So the days went on. This was a few weeks ago, and I came up with an idea in my head about what I wanted to share with you this morning. And this week, Pastor Hubbard and I had a phone call, and I told him what my thoughts were. And he said, yeah, that's great, that's fine. And then he said, and this is roughly a quote, it might be helpful to share why you're so passionate about the ACLU. And I was like, okay, well, all right. And then he said, and maybe reflect about, what brings you to it. And I said, okay, because I understand what that means intellectually. And then at some point, Pastor Hubbard very deliberately and cautiously, I don't know if he remembers, he used the word spiritual. And I don't know if he heard like the air go out of my body when he said that. So by trade, I'm an attorney, and I argue and I research and I write about rights and I talk about them, but it's probably fair to say that I have never uttered a first-person sentence about rights ever, right? It's always defendant, plaintiff, the case, whatever. But, all is not lost because I did go to college. I went to grad school. I had plenty of time to, read really theoretical things. So at some point I did have those thoughts. And I'm going to get to the reflective part in a moment. I will not let Pastor Hubbard down. But first, I want to pose a question to you. And if anyone wants to answer, I would really love to maybe call on some people. So you can raise your hand if you're willing to play along. But if you want to just not, that's great. I'll get the hint. But here's the question. What makes a person be an activist? So another way to think of it is, what makes a person fight for someone else? Commitment? Passion. Anger. Pain. Love. Love it. All of those things, right? Everything. You guys are great, thank you. So I want to talk about a couple landmark civil liberty victories that the ACLU has been a part of. Not all of them, but most of what I'm about to say is something that the ACLU took a central role in. Going back about 100 years, in the years following World War I, America was gripped by the fear that the communist revolution was going to be duplicated in the United States. As is often the case when fear outweighs reason, civil liberties paid a huge price. In November 1919 and January 1920, in what notoriously became known as the Palmer Raids, Attorney General Mitchell Palmer began rounding up these so-called radicals. Thousands of people were arrested without warrants, without any regard to constitutional protections and mandates. People were subject to unlawful searches and seizures, and then once they were arrested, they were treated brutally and they were held in horrible conditions. In the face of these egregious civil liberties abuses, a small group of people decided to take a stand, and that was the birth of the American Civil Liberties Union. And over the years since that time, this group of idealists has really emerged as the preeminent defender in this country of our U.S. Constitution. Shortly after the Palmer Raids, in 1925, you've probably heard just the popular reference name to it, the Scopes Trials, the Scopes Monkey Trials. So the ACLU was involved in that, working with John Scopes, a high school teacher who stood up for the right in public schools to teach evolution. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, we now know that more than 110,000 Japanese Americans were sent to internment camps. A man named Fred Korematsu challenged those internment camps and, again, made case law history, made civil liberties history. Years later, in 1954, Linda Brown, in the famous case Brown v. Board of Education, On a personal note, it's just a case that's near and dear to my heart. I don't do education law, but this is the case that announced that separate but equal, the law of the land at that time under Plessy v. Ferguson, was unconstitutional. And it wasn't unconstitutional only as a rule of law. It was unconstitutional because the Supreme Court took a close look at the facts in schools and determined that, in fact, they were unequal, right? And so it's interesting to reflect on that case because it's an example of courts not looking only at prior case law, but looking at data and making a decision based on that too. Years later, in 1967, Mildred and Richard Loving stood up for the right to marry. They challenged Virginia's laws against interracial marriage after the police raided their bedroom in the middle of the night. And I didn't know that. In 1973, the Supreme Court victory of Roe v. Wade brought women the right to decide whether or not to terminate or continue a pregnancy. Recently, in 2003, John Lawrence, this is another bedroom encounter, a bedroom encounter with the Texas police led to this triumph in gay rights. He challenged a law that made sexual intimacy between same-sex couples a crime. Planned Parenthood director Estelle Griswold stood up for the right to use contraception. Clarence Gideon stood up for the right to a court-appointed attorney if you can't afford one. Ernesto Miranda stood up for the right to remain silent. Edie Windsor brought down the Defense of Marriage Act and set the stage for the right to marry. This year, just very recently, a young girl named Elena Fry with cerebral palsy stood up for her right to use a service dog in her public school. And today, the ACLU remains a champion of 4 segments of the population who have traditionally been denied their rights, who have been marginalized, who have been hated, who have been ignored, who have been deliberately and systematically and deliberately denied the protections of the Constitution. And I'll stop there just for a second. I know that this is an amazing church, and I know that some of your congregants are members of the ACLU, so if anyone would raise their hand if they were at the annual dinner in Dearborn. Tom, Pete, anybody else? Okay. So part of that is because I have to cop to the fact that I just borrowed some language from the executive director, Carrie Moss, from her speech. And I did it because her speech was wonderful. She went through and she identified the plaintiff, the party, and the right that they fought for. And I thought that that was a really meaningful way to talk about civil liberties. One of the things she also did that I thought that struck me was she spoke directly to a young girl who was present in Dearborn at the annual dinner. Her name was Hala Kogali. And she spoke to her specifically about the role of adults in the sort of post-November 2016 world. She said that, she said, in the midst of all the fear and uncertainty of deportation, of unlawful searches and seizures and unlawful raids, one thing that adults have to do is commit to the children that we, the adults, will make it right. And she spoke directly to Hala, who was there, and she said, Hala, everyone in this room loves you. And then she repeated herself, and she said, everyone in this room loves your family. And she went on then to say that we were fighting with her and her family. But that word love, I don't know that she meant it to be as moving or profound a word as it was, to me at least. But think about the context, right? The ACLU is comprised of very high-powered legal minds with incredible academic pedigrees. Makes me nervous to speak to some of these people. And you don't often, in that context, hear the words, we love you. But I don't think that Carrie Moss could have been more right. And here's where I'm going to try not to let the pastor down. To me, that's the essential part of the project of activism. It's love, for me. If you consider all the legal battles that I just listed, every single one, all of those plaintiffs succeeded within the momentum of a greater community, right? Family, friends, lawyers, maybe even the family of the lawyers who weren't working for a whole lot of money, who had to suffer while they all agreed that it was worth spending the time and the effort to defend those rights. Mosques and synagogues and churches like yours who supported them and who fought for them. So it's always a movement, right? It's not just an isolated legal argument. It is always a movement. And let's think about it more. What would bind so many people together in the face of inconceivable obstacles like racism, like legal segregation, violence, hostility, unfettered police power? What would do that? And in my view, it's not intellectual agreement about a philosophical principle like what does a right mean, or what are the nature of rights, or where do rights come from? Books that, I mean, I've read those books. I don't think those have the answers, and I don't think they're posing or framing the issue properly either. On my view, it is love for other people that brings people together. And I would posit that just as fear and selfishness drives ideology and ideologues that promote racist, classist, and sexist policy, it is love that conversely drives activists, people like us here today, to fight for a better life for our fellow human beings. And I want to talk now and just shift gears and talk about what happens in West Michigan at the ACLU at the meetings that I go to. And I have to say that at our local meetings, the Lawyers Committee and the Western Unit meetings, I hear member after member talk about concerns for injustices that they experience. And I don't know that ever it's an experience that they felt was unfair to them, right? It's always something that they report was unfair to someone else, someone maybe who didn't have any demographic similarities to them. And when I hear my fellow members talk, to me it sounds like it's coming from love and devotion and care. That's my experience of it. I don't know how else you explain people with very busy schedules spending so much time and so specifically talking and focusing on ways that other people are being mistreated. So let's talk now about what the ACLU of Michigan is doing in Grand Rapids. I'm going to focus, we're doing a lot, but I want to focus on three projects. The first is related to policing, and the second two, one is related to sex ed and one is related to sexual assault issues. And so I'll give you a heads up when I get to the second two, but to the extent that that's uncomfortable for any children in the audience, I want to give everyone a heads up to step out or whatever you feel is necessary. But for now, this is about the Grand Rapids Police, so it shouldn't be a problem. Last month, the Grand Rapids Police Department released a study that was conducted. It's a consulting company called Lamberth Consulting. Not important, but it was a paid-for study with rigorous methodology, et cetera. And what the study did is it examined 20 intersections throughout the city during 2013, 14, and 15, and then it compared current data with data collected during a similar study of during 2004. Is anyone familiar with the study? Have you heard? Okay, great. So what did the results show? The results showed that Black motorists are twice as likely to be stopped by police within the city of Grand Rapids as non-Black drivers. Hispanic drivers also experienced disparities while driving in some areas of the community. According to the report, Black motorists were searched far more likely than their presence in traffic among stopped motorists. Black motorists were also no more likely to be carrying contraband when searched than non-Black motorists. I want to repeat that. Black motorists were also no more likely to be carrying contraband when searched than were non-Black motorists. Hispanic motorists were searched at about the same rate as stopped, And contraband was found at a somewhat lower rate than among white and black motorists, which is begging for a comment about the bad dudes and the border wall and the criminals, right? So what to do? So last week, the Western Michigan ACLU met with community groups. We met with LINC, we met with the Urban League and with the NAACP to talk about how to respond, because in our view, it's very important to guide the solution rather than let the police department decide what they're going to do about their own problems. One thing they're considering is a public panel that includes the police chief, certain members of the community, certain civil rights related professionals, experts, et cetera. The ACLU has also planned a discussion with an expert on police profiling, policing, and civil rights that will occur at the end of this month. The reason I'm telling you this is that if that's something that you are interested in, if that's something that you're passionate about, join us. Fountain Street Church has always been a tremendous partner of the ACLU, and if this particular issue is something that really speaks to you, there's a problem, and we can plug you in to help solving the solution, and you can help us too, right? So the next issue that we're addressing right now, and it's sex ed that's being taught in public schools in Kent County. So this is pretty easy breezy content-wise, but just a heads up. The problem that we've identified is that a lot of area school districts, for sure including Forest Hills and the middle school in GRPS, they teach a sex ed curriculum. It's called Willing to Wait. And the program purports to be a comprehensive sex ed program, but when you look at the content, it's very clearly an abstinence-only sex ed program. The problem with this is that abstinence-only programs don't have great effectiveness. They don't have any demonstrated ability to delay sexual activity or teen pregnancy or STDs. Whereas real accurate comprehensive sex ed has been proven to lower teen pregnancy by up to 50% and a 40% delay in the age of initiation of sexual activity, and it has proven to lower STD rates as well. All too often, though, the Willing to Wait curriculums really focus on the negative side of sexual activity and has very glaring factual inaccuracies and medical inaccuracies. The psychology of the program is pretty narrow. It's exclusive, and it blurs science and religion somewhat, a lot. There's no mention of gay or transgender individuals either, right? So imagine being in high school, which is a miserable, miserable time for anybody. And then imagine being not, plain vanilla Joe or Sue or whatever, right? So imagine being a transgender student, imagine being a gay student, and then being taught this curriculum. In addition, there are factual inaccuracies like the following. It says that condoms are ineffective at preventing the spread of chlamydia. Raise your hand if you know that's not true. It's not true. It does prevent the spread of chlamydia. It also says that condoms fail 15 to 17% of the time when used to prevent pregnancy. Not true. The current failure rates of condoms is less than 4%. The most effective and least burdensome method of contraception, possibly the IUD, is also described incorrectly. The Willing to Wait curriculum that our kids are being taught says that IUDs may cause disease, and that's not true. Don't cause disease, right? Also, HPV, the human papillomavirus, is described as being contagious for life. The length of time a person is contagious is not known, and the literature does not support a conclusion that it's contagious for life, and most people who are infected with it never have any symptoms. So that's a problem we've identified, right? So we have a subcommittee of our Western unit that's working to get information about what all the school districts in Kent County are teaching. We started off making phone calls and calling and just asking, and then when and if we didn't get a response, we're sending out a FOIA to get information about what these curricula are. On a positive note, GRPS High School used to teach Willing to Wait, and now it's teaching the Michigan model, which is a comprehensive curricula, and it is a result of efforts of a lot of the people on the subcommittee and the ACLU. So schools are willing to listen, but you can imagine it's a pretty touchy subject. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is issues surrounding sexual assault on campus. And if anybody wants to make any adjustments for audience members, I can sit tight, or if you want to just go forward, I can just do that. Okay. So last spring, a Stanford swimmer, Brock Turner, was found guilty of sexually assaulting, of raping an unconscious woman on campus. And then he was sentenced. Does anybody remember what he was sentenced for? 6 months, right? Fantastic. So his dad at sentencing, well, the survivor wrote a 12 or 13 single-page letter that she read to the defendant at sentencing. His father wrote a shorter letter, like I think it was very brief. One of the remarks that the father made was that his son would never be his happy-go-lucky self with his easygoing personality and his welcoming smile. That a longer sentence would be a steep price to pay for 20 minutes of action out of his 20-year life. And that the son would miss steak, which was his favorite food. Miss steak. Right. So the judge thought that that was more compelling than, or, right, other factors, sure. But he only got 6 months. If that doesn't shock your conscience, then I would respectfully say that there's something wrong with you. Just by way of comparison, I can tell you that people, black men, are sentenced twice as long in Kent County for shoplifting more than $250 worth of merchandise. Absolutely, right? I used to live and work in Missoula, Montana, and in the end of 2012 and then the subsequent years, there were a bunch of cases and trials involving multiple defendants on the football team. Football's big in Montana. Same thing, alcohol was involved, there were allegations of sexual misconduct, and I don't believe, I'm going to get my facts wrong, but either they weren't charged, well, suffice it to say that it was a great miscarriage of justice, and there's actually one very good book that's been written about it, and I actually think that Pete Armstrong, so just to single you out again, I feel like maybe we spoke about it, but it's just another example of not taking violence against women, and not always just women, on campuses seriously. So that fast forward a little bit to this past fall, right, fall 2016, there was a lot of news in the paper about sexual assaults at Hope College in Grand Valley. It's a problem, right? We all know that sexual assaults on campus is a problem. We know that. It's a problem that sexual assaults seem to be a chronic condition of campus life. Back when I went to college in the mid-90s, it was a problem, and it's still a problem. It doesn't appear that anything's changed, right? Someone just got sentenced for 6 months for raping an unconscious woman. So what's the solution? So this is tough, right? And it's something that we talked about, we have spoken about a lot at the ACLU. It's tough because it doesn't seem like the problem is more studies about the prevalence. For sure, when I was in school, it seemed like that was what we were trying to do. We would do surveys. We would talk about, are there people for you to talk to if this were to happen? Has it ever happened? Do you know anyone it's ever happened to, et cetera? And it seems like we have data. But then what? It seems like a lot of the survivors aren't prosecuting, and maybe they're not prosecuting because of the stigma, and because what's the point? There's a sort of in vainness about all of it if the sentences never are even vaguely commensurate with the crime. So we've been talking about this, and we landed on the recognition that what we have, and of course we all know this, we know this, right? But we live in a world, we live in courts and campuses where the culture is rape. The culture is this rape culture where rape is prevalent, it's normalized, It's supported by language that objectifies and dehumanizes and rationalizes illegal conduct based on what the survivor drank or wore or said or how she danced or how he danced or what he did or what she did. And it's based on how the offender felt about the illegal conduct. For example, that the survivor wanted it or at least didn't not want it that much, or it wasn't a big deal. And this is what happens in our courtrooms and our campuses. So this is what we have planned, at least in our small way, to try to work on it in our community. There's a movie called The Hunting Ground. It's pretty controversial. It's pretty troubling. It's about sexual assaults on college campuses. We're going to hold a screening, and we're also going to organize a panel discussion. And the panel we want to cover, we don't want to only talk to women's studies people. We don't want to only talk to counseling professionals. We want to talk to Greek life. We want to talk to people in athletics departments, people in residential life, social workers, counselors, law enforcement. We want to talk to men and women, and we want to ask really tough questions and force them to answer it and see what happens and work from there. So again, if that's something that anyone here cares about, please, partner within your church with us, come to us directly, but let's work together. We also, the ACLU of West Michigan has 5 just strategic focuses that I'm going to share with you, again, just by way of information. LGBTQ+, women's rights, reproductive rights. 3 is smart justice, criminal reform, immigration, voting rights. And then the final 6th is surveillance issues. We call it 21st century Fourth Amendment, but surveillance, police surveillance, issues like that. So I'm wrapping up quickly now, and it would be silly, I think, of me to talk about civil liberties and activisms and fail to quote Reverend Martin Luther King. And so I'm going to repeat a few sentences that he spoke in Washington, D.C. in 1968 on the dangers of neglecting important social issues. One of the great liabilities of history is that all too many people fail to remain awake through great periods of social change. Every society has its protectors of the status quo and its fraternities of the indifferent who are notorious for sleeping through revolutions. Today, our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change. So probably with the 2016 election and subsequent executive orders, it's hard to think that anyone could be sleeping now, maybe. But at the same time, sometimes, and I'm speaking for myself now too, sometimes when there's so much to do, it does feel like it's possible to be lulled to sleep by the noise, the constant noise of the arguments, the constant noise of the pundits, by the endlessness of the fight. But we can't do that. We can't protect the status quo. We have no excuse. We have all the resources, we have all the knowledge, we have all the education, we have all the avenues, and we can't protect the status quo. What Grand Rapids Police Department is doing to our Black residents of our city is not okay, right? It is not okay for any student at Hope or Grand Valley to be sexually assaulted, and it's not okay for the defenders to evade penalties under the protective shroud of rape culture. The Western unit of the ACLU of Michigan always partners with groups, right? So when we do these events, we're always doing it in concert with other groups. And your church is already a tremendous partner. So I would encourage you, let's do more. Let's not stop. If you have ideas, I would encourage you to take them to Edgar or Jason or Fred or Tom or Pete. I'm sure there are women too that you could take them to, as I list, right? It's good. It's funny. It's funny. Let's see. It is an honor to speak with you. I understand and I feel that I'm in a room full of people with a lot of love. And I would just say, let's do it. Let's do it together. Let's struggle together for the rights of others. And please, let's not sleep through this revolution. Let's not. Thank you.
I want to thank all who have come to share their gifts with us this day, and particularly to Joslin for upgrading, I think, for me, and I hope for you, this focus we took into our meditation today, this question of for what will I stand? For me, I can't help but leave this day feeling like the question is now just a bit longer. For what shall I stand for others? There's the radical act of love in civil liberties. I'm not sure I'll ever think of the ACLU the same again. Thank you for that. I hope you've all been blessed in that same way, and I really do encourage you as we close our worship to come down the outside aisles if you would like to come forward and greet the members of the Withered Tree Sangha who will welcome you to practice the blessing art of washing the baby at Wesak. I hope you will come down and do this. If you need to use the rail here, we're happy to help as well. Go, friends, and be that voice in our community which in love stands for others. Bless one another. Feel that spirit which has given you life, desire to overflow as you share your life with others for love and for justice and for peace in our time. May it be so, and amen.